I would now like to request Mr. Sufi to shed light on what these compliance issues are for the South Asian region and how have they impacted regional dynamics. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dr. McCain, Maham, Chair of the Board, President, honorable members, ladies and gentlemen, and quite a few law students here today. Assalamu alaikum. Professor McCain's insightful overview of international law, various shades, is an excellent summing up of where international law stands today. And I think I would like to add a shade more, de-emphasizing of international law at appropriate occasions. So if you have UN Security Council resolutions which are standing ground, which have not been rescinded, which have not been recalled, which have not been sidelined or even impliedly repealed by Security Council, simply by de-emphasizing them, we come to a selective use of international law. I'm talking about Kashmir, Professor McCain, in which we have several Chapter 6 and Chapter 7 resolutions for the resolution of the issue of Kashmir, the dispute of Jammu and Kashmir, the issue of disposal of the people of Kashmir and their self-determination, and that entire law comprising of over a dozen UN Security Council resolution that administers that dispute, which was laid down by the Security Council, has been de-emphasized. So it exists on the paper, it exists on the platform, but it stands de-emphasized. No one wants to talk about it. Having said that, the shades that you have talked about bring across a view of international law for young lawyers as if this discipline has a very bad fate that is likely to hit it. Is that so? Well, partly yes. This is a difficult situation, a situation in which we have what is going on in the north with respect to issues in the south and how it has been selectively done. But at the same time, from a South's perspective, I believe the existence of a system, of a global system, howsoever it may be damaged partially in the contemporary times, is important. Its existence is necessary. The mere fact that there are so many multilateral instruments that regulate international affairs, the mere fact that there are so many international institutions, organizations, legal regimes which function, they may not be functioning very smoothly in public international law issues, but then we have private international law bodies which are functioning far more effortlessly and seamlessly between North and South, notwithstanding the various political crises that the global community is looking at. So if you were to look at the transit conventions, laws laid down in private international law matters by entities like ICC, International Chamber of Commerce, by entities like UNCITRAL, UN Commission for International Trade Law, by entities like UNCTAD, UNIDRAW, and several others, the international conventions relating to all those under which the entire global trade takes place, whether it's the Bill of Lading, whether it's Container Convention, whether it's shipping documentation, whether it is letters of credit framework through various banks. So far, so good, touch wood, that's going on smoothly. So there are two levels at which we need to divide our discussion. Level one, public international law, about which 10 shades you have talked about, and I've added an 11th one. But then there is a second tier of international law, which is private international law matters. And these private international law, notwithstanding, as I said, all the disputes, has been functioning, has been going on. So before you come to a judgment that there is no need for international law, I just thought to make you aware that all said and done, existence of these international institutions are nevertheless important from a developing South point of view. Because for southern countries, countries like us, countries in Africa, countries in South America, these standards, howsoever they are carved, shaped, negotiated, written down, are important. That is how we build our argument. That is how we build our state positions around this language, around this text. The text may be partly sidelined, selectively implied, but it exists. It nevertheless tells us that that is where that the legal compass should point towards. So if there is a human rights convention which exists on record, if there are provisions formulated in 1966, whether in the ICCPR or whether in Geneva Conventions, we exactly now have a standard to measure the conduct of certain states. Well, Israel is violating Geneva Convention 4, Geneva Convention 3, article this, article that. There is a very powerful narrative nonetheless, based on which you have door opening to ICJ and so many other venues. So I believe from a certain point of view, there is a need to recognize, strengthen these institutions as much as we can, keeping in view our long-term strategic advantages and keeping in view the consistency and coming together on the table on some of these issues. Just as a pointer, 3 areas in which the North was not interested, but because the South was very, very keen to do a lot of legislative work, international conventions got shaped up. Law of the Sea Convention, one of the negotiators is sitting here. Both of you are sitting here who participated in Law of the Sea Conventions negotiations. US government has been opposing it. The most powerful country in the northern side has been in complete opposition of the whole idea of extending boundaries into sea, whether beyond 3 nautical miles to 12 nautical miles, an exclusive economic zone up to 200 nautical miles, strongly protested. They did not even join the 1982 Law of the Sea Convention. Notwithstanding that, ladies and gentlemen, the southern countries came together and they were able to actually hammer out this convention, which today is the governing law of the seas. Likewise, ICC, International Criminal Court, created by the Rome Statute in 1993, was opposed again by the US and several other northern countries in the northern globe. But again, developing countries came together, and the initiative was led by, you may be friends with Professor Sharif Bisyani, no longer here now, but in the Chicago University, and several other international lawyers coming from developing countries, and they pushed it. And eventually today, ICC is an international body. It may not be able to issue and serve the summons as of now, but the very fact it has processed them, it has identified what are the crimes against humanity and so on, is very refreshing in its own right. We had no other framework to follow. So therefore, I believe that the South still has a lot of opportunities in numerous areas. Climate, we just heard a session before, we're talking about the climate justice and so on, is an issue in which South is coming together to create a noise which has led to a parking of $100 million fund, through which now we can make an effort to reach out to that fund. So while there is a disconnect in Gaza, while there is an issue with vis-a-vis Kashmir, while there is a high-end issue relating to Ukraine and Russia, still the international order holds the field. It stands de-emphasized. It stands partially losing its color, it's selectively being used, that notwithstanding. So I think, as of now, where we stand, the cost of selective use of international law is obvious to anyone. And for any man on the street, when I'm stopped personally on streets or when I'm going to the court by fellow lawyers who say, where is the international law that you have been talking about in this country for 30 years? Look what is happening in Gaza, what's happening in Kashmir. I face a difficult time. But having said that, as I said, the environment in which we are today is an environment from which we have to be rebuilt. And now what we are sensing is, Professor McCain, is an alternative legal framework coming through SCO, BRICS, and others, which is a very interesting development. So I think instead of weakening the law, it is adding yet another regional tier-minded countries, and that tier will redefine somewhere in the middle where will this law come and hold on to. WTO framework, as you rightly said, was something that is taken advantage of by the China the most. In 1993, around that time frame when it was negotiated, the Chinese lawyers read the treaty and they realized it is giving an unbelievable advantage that you could export things and legally no one can stop you. So they started realigning their manufacturing policy, economic policy, to take advantage of an international treaty this thick, this big, which will not be able to stop legitimate trade that moves out. Hence, now the advantage belongs to them. So there is no other choice left except to de-emphasize WTO in one sense. So I'll, for the time being, stop here. I understand there are a few questions that you have to ask and few questions from the audience. Thank you very much.
Sufi Sahab, my question to you is that you just spoke about the role that international organizations play in regional dynamics, and particularly with regards to Pakistan and the role that Pakistan can play. What do you think should be the role of international stakeholders, international organizations, and the international civil society in ensuring the reform of the international legal order to one that reflects the realities of the global south more?
Thank you very much. You see, international organizations or international civil society, when you refer, let's be more specific in terms of giving examples. African Society of International Law is an international civil society. Afro-Asian Committee is an international civil society of lawyers. Research Society of International Law is a civil society, and so on. What I'm saying is that when they can have a lot of influence at global lawmaking. They can influence the policy. They can also influence the way international organizations think. And you will understand better that all international organizations, whenever they conduct events, they have special venues, they have special slots for international organizations that are given accreditation by ECOSOC, Economic and Social Council. And there are hundreds of such organizations, some into refugees, some into human rights, some into development, some relating to protection of minors, some relating to labor, some relating to law, some relating to international conventions, and so forth. So these entities which sit behind the states in forums like Geneva, Vienna, and New York are very powerful because their narrative is heard. They are able to, on the sideline, convince even state delegates to come in line with their views. So I think they have a role, and if there are such organizations, they should, people from Pakistan should participate, and they too should coordinate. I mean, for example, we were discussing the African Society of International Law could coordinate. The Hague Academy of International Law, for example, they have a operational arm for young students. Why can't African Society and our society and Hague Academy of International Law conduct some sort of a capacity building work, a periodic series? So that's how you create an influence over a period of time. And another way of doing that is to find an employment in the legal divisions of these international organizations. We have young lawyers sitting here, and you would also know that the legal divisions have an enormous influence in the policy of the secretariat of every organization. So if you are able to find openings in the UN venues relating to international organizations, legal divisions, you will be doing yourself a great service and your country. Remember, in IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, 2 lawyers from the legal division rose to become the Director Generals, Mr. Al-Baradi and Mr. Hans Blix. Both were international lawyers from the legal division.
Nader Turk, Deputy Division Palestine Embassy. Thanks for the speaker for a very rich statement, which giving answers and questions. Actually, I will focus about Gaza, what happened there, genocide, ethnic cleansing, crimes against humanity. It is show clearly the failure of the international system, international law, international organizations. It shows the missing of democracy in the United Nations, especially in the Security Council. When we see, as example, 4 times we go for ceasefire, and the veto of Americans make it fail. On the other hand, the Americans' propaganda speak about protecting civilians in Gaza. We go for the General Assembly United Nations requesting full membership of the State of Palestine, okay, to the United Nations, and the majority of General Assembly agreed of that and sent the request of Palestine membership, full membership to Security Council. About 13 countries agreed of that to make Palestine enjoy full membership. On the other hand, the American veto only makes that dream, that tried, destroyed, and damaged. We will see the second things and third things. I think the United Nations and the international law lose or something missing for it, that it don't have the power to follow up the resolutions, follow up the orders of the law, because there is no fangs and claws for the United Nations. The only power which is follow is the United States of America, according to their own interest. What happened in Iraq, Afghanistan, Gaza right now, Libya, many issues. So, my questions, very simple. How we can protect humanity from such crimes against humanity, what we see in Gaza, but after the failure of the international organization. South-South cooperation is good, but not enough. Reform of United Nations is good, but not enough. So what we can do? This is my first question. Second, how we can punish the criminals, countries, when they are supported by power countries. When I speak about third world facing such thing like this. We are facing battle between logic of power and the power of logic. Israelis, supported by Americans, British, Germans, and other Western countries, and the double standards and all that things, okay? This is power of the logic of power. On the other hand, Palestinians in their rights to struggle for independence, peace, freedom, enjoying their own right, which is waiting and bending since 1947 after 181 resolution. And this is the joke actually, that Israel as a state was establishing by order of international resolution created by United Nations in 1947. On the other hand, Israelis until now not respect and obey any international order or any international resolution. With that, they are still member of the United Nations, which are not obey their orders and their resolution. On the other hand, Palestinians who are the victim of this resolution are still out of the membership of United Nations. So what we can do, what the technique, what the process which we do to be sure that the future of the next generation going to be better, safe, and they are going to be protected from such crimes like this. Thank you very much.
First of all, Excellency, I would like to, as a member of the human race, apologize to you and through you to the entire people of Palestine, women, children who are left living, and my condolences for those who have received Shahada. It's very embarrassing to address someone like you, given what we have let happen, the entire world. From a purely legal point of view, under the Genocide Convention, Article 1, there is an explicit duty on every state party to Genocide Convention to prevent it. Article 1 is very explicit. Preventing means you can prevent it through diplomatic means, through coercive means, through possible use of force wherever it is possible. So as far as legal obligation on all member states are concerned, who are parties to Genocide Convention, they have a duty to prevent the genocide, and they have failed in their duty. So the failure is attributable to all members of the who are parties to Genocide Convention specifically, and to international community in general. Now, another reason why international community needs to realize, and members of the Genocide Convention and also UN Charter need to realize, is that this is not going to stop with Palestine territory. There's a greater Israel plan owned and announced. So on the basis of historic title, there is an attempted extension of the territories of the neighboring states. So 7 or 8 neighboring states are under the serious threat of losing territory. So all that put together, there is a legal urgency to address the matter of Israel and Palestine.
Thank you, sir. And I just have a follow-up question to that. Sir, you've spoken extensively about the Akhand Bharat situation with India as well. Do you see that there are any parallels between what Israel is doing and what their end goal is, and what India's end goal is, with starting from what they've done in Kashmir to their stance on now the Indus Waters Treaty? So do you see a parallel between the two countries?
Ji Maham, I do clearly see. There are only 2 states. All of the states are at the minimum. The common minimum is that we uphold international territories. We uphold international boundaries and boundary territories. So no one is threatening the alteration of those boundaries. Only 2 states have a plan, an announced plan, officially owned. One is unfortunately Israel, the other is India. And both are relying on a historic title, on a historic promise. If this is how it is going to develop, then every country will say, well, people in Senegal will say, people in South Africa will say, well, we owned the entire continent, give it to us. We can say, well, at some point in time, we were completely occupying the entire. So this is going to be an endless and a wasteful debate. And so I think these 2 countries have this. And in this Water Treaty framework, again, you notice the notice has been served after 5th August 2019 presidential order, because they understand that this territory that they are claiming the title of, that title is obstructed, and that title is encumbered because of a treaty which treats another country as an independent state.
My name is Mohammad Umar Farooq, and I am a student of law at International Islamic University, Islamabad. My question is from both Professor McCain and Ahmed Biral Sufi. As you discussed, that there is a lot of issue with international law, and there is selective compliance. So is it possible, and is it a solution that we develop international law for global south that is totally different, and international law that deal with global north? If not, what are other reliable solutions? Thank you.
My name is Rana Sham, and I'm from NAST Law School. Sir, my question to you is that basically the ultimate goal of international law is not just to end the genocide going on in Gaza, but also to end the occupation on the West Bank as well. All right. So we all know the response of the international community over the acts of Israel is that they somehow justified because of the element of armed resistance, and they say that these are acts of terrorism. So basically, my question is, since you are an international law expert, do you think that there is some other way which can lead to a 2-state solution, which can lead to the occupation finally ending? Or do you think that this armed resistance, it must go on? And we all know that up and until armed resistance will go on, so will Israel's response. Thank you very much, sir.
We can take the question here. Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. First of all, my gratitude to the honorable speakers for the enlightening session. My question concerns the principles of jus cogens and opinio juris in international law. So my question is, in situations where powerful states invoke national security to selectively comply with jus cogens norms, how can international law specifically address the resultant inconsistencies in opinio juris and state practice?
And we have the last question here. This gentleman has had his hand up very big.
Assalamu alaikum. I am Taimur Akbar, a student of law from NAST. I have a very simple question, that is, if UN member countries themselves obstruct the process of law and enforcement of law, then what is the solution regarding these barriers?
So that question is that if the UN member states are themselves curtailing the process of international law, then what is the process? I think it's pertaining to the P5.
Yes, then
Majorly,
what
yeah.
are the solutions to these barriers?
Okay, regarding having a separate international law for global north and global south, not advisable per se, but yes, an alternative law creation actually strengthens the earlier law by reaction. Second point, self-determination or two-state solution. I think this matter needs to be finally resolved. Whether a two-state acceptable solution to both the parties or any other manner, the matter relating to Israel and Palestine needs to be resolved as early as possible in order to ensure that no further genocides are committed. Third, if the UN member countries obstruct, well, there has been a discussion on creating a membership which is based on more equitable distribution. We don't have a permanent seat of African countries, we don't have a permanent seat of OIC countries, we don't have a permanent seat of several other sectors. So I think at some point that needs to be also addressed so that this inequity is also addressed. Thank you.